Okay, hello. So good to see everyone. Thank you for joining us for Chabura Public Shiur. Today we have the privilege of having with us Dr. Shana, Strauch, Schick, and together we'll be exploring the important principle of Kavana regarding the performance of Miṣvot. About our speaker, Dr. Shana is a lecturer in rabbinic literature in the multidisciplinary Department of Jewish Studies at Bar Ilan University and teaches Talmud and Jewish law at the Risha Institute, New York. In 2011, she became the first woman to be awarded a PhD in Talmud from Bernard Revel Graduate School, Yeshiva University. She also studied in Stern College's GPATS from 2002 to 2007. She's the author of Intention in Talmudic Law Between Thought and Deed. Her upcoming monography is entitled Woman in Rabbinic Law and Narrative, Divine Currents in Babylonian and Palestinian Texts. In Chabura News, as you all know, we recently put out our book on Shavuot. So if you have not yet, make sure to order yourself a copy and have it by you in time for the Moed. Also, stay tuned. We're almost putting out our new membership. So stay tuned for that. And whether you are the 10% who join us live or the 90% who watch the recording, thank you for being here. Thank you so much, Professor, for being with us, and enjoy the shiur.
Thank you so much for having me today or tonight, depending on where you are. So today we're going to talk about a principle that appears, thank you, only in the Bavli for the first time, and that's a principle called Miṣvot ein tzrichot Kavana, the performance of a ritual mitzvot, because we're really talking about rituals, does not require intention in order to fulfill them. So what we are going to do is trace the development of this principle, see how it came to be in the Bavli, how it's attributed to one of the most prominent rabbis in the Babylonian Talmud, the fourth generation Amora Rava. And we're going to see how not only does this break from early rabbinic precedent, but it also breaks from other halachot which Rava issues, and in other areas of halacha, namely the violation of isurim, he actually places a very prominent role on a person's purpose and intention. So we're going to start with. Let me share my screen right now with the sources. Okay. So we're going to start with a few mitzvot that appear in the Mishnah, which are very clear that Kavana in attention is reacquired. So first one we have is in Masechet Brachot, Haya Koreh Batorah, if someone is reading the Torah, and it seems that they happen to be reading the portion of the Torah which has Shema Yisrael in it. They're reading Devarim, and then it just so happens that it's also Zman HaMikra, Higia Zman HaMikra. It happens to be the time that they have to recite Shema. Im Kivein Libo Yatsa, Vim Lav Lo Yatsa. So if they, Kivein Libo literally means they direct their heart. If the person directs their heart, and it seems to be to fulfill the mitzvah to recite Shema, then they fulfill the mitzvah. Vimla, but if they do not direct their heart, they do not fulfill the obligation. So again, it doesn't define what it means to be mechavein libo. What does that mean? But it does. It would seem to be to do the mitzvah. And we have a similar directive with regard to blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. I really like this Mishnah. So someone is going past a shul, or their house is near a shul, the shama kol shofar. And again, it happens to be Rosh Hashanah, and they hear the sound of the shofar being blown. So I like this Mishnah because I live right near a shul, and when I had given birth to one of my children, I could just hear the shofar being blown from my terrace. So you're passing by a shul and you hear the shofar. and it happens to be Rosh Hashanah, or Kol Megillah, or you're walking past a shul and it happens to be a Purim and you hear them reading the Megillah inside. Once again, we have that same language we saw in Brachot. Im kivein libo yatsa, vim lav lo yatsa. If you direct your heart, if he directs his heart, he fulfills his obligation. Vim lav lo yatsa. But if he does not direct his heart, he does not fulfill his obligation. And now it tells us something very significant. Even though you have two people doing the same exact action, they both heard, this person heard and this person heard. This one had intent and this one did not have intent. Meaning it's not just about an action. Your action alone is not what defines whether you fulfill the mitzvah. You also have to have it be accompanied by a proper kavana, a proper mindset. Now, again, it doesn't say what this mindset is. Now, I just brought you source 3. A similar point is made in Mishnah Megillah, Masechet Megillah, and now this is the location of Megillah Esther. So it just brings the same point. Your Hayat Kutzva, Dorsha, Megillah, someone is writing Megillat Esther, or they're being dorish it, they're expounding it, or they're correcting it, making sure they're dotting all the T's and the I's, or all the digation are in place. Once again, and it happens to be a Purim, and it happens to be the time when you have to read the Megillah. Again, in Kived Bo Yatsav and Lav Lo Yatsav. It all depends on, did you direct your heart or not? If you did, you fulfill the mitzvah. If not, you don't. So again, we don't have a definition of what this means to direct one's heart. However, very interestingly, right after our Mishnah here in Rosh Hashanah, and this is, Parak Gimel, the third parak of Rosh Hashanah is all about the obligation to sound the shofar and how you do so. And then at the end of that, we have kind of seemingly out of nowhere, source number 4. Sorry, let me make this bigger. Midrashic text brings a homily. So this homily it's from Shemot, the famous pasuk. I think it's famous with the war of Amalek. So it says, Amalek came and waged a war on the Israelites in that desert. And it said, as long as Moshe raised his hands, then Israel was victorious. And when he lowered his hands, the Amalekim, they were the ones who were victorious. So we know Aaron and Hor had to hold up Moshe's hands for him. So that's the pasuk. The Mishnah here asks, "V'chi yadav shel Moshe osot milchama o shavrot milchama." What do you mean his hands? If his hands were up, they won it, and if they were lowered, they lost. Do the hands of Moshe make war or break a war? What does him raising his hands have to do with the victory of the Israelites? So the Mishnah answers us, Ela lomar lecha shekol zman shu Yisrael mistaklim kelape mala. So it's to tell you, as long as Israel looked upwards, umishabdim et libam leavim shebashamayim, and they subjugated their hearts to their Father in heaven, hayu mitgabrim, then they were strong, they were victorious. Ve'imlav hayu noflim, and if not, they fell. Okay, so this is this midrash, and then it brings a similar homily with regard to the nachash hanechoshet, the copper serpent that Moshe made when the Israelites were stricken with this terrible plague. And again, and it says whoever looked at it was healed, and whoever wasn't, wasn't, and whoever didn't look at it wasn't healed. So again, it asks, does looking at a copper serpent heal you or not? And again, is to tell you, is to tell you, as long as Israel looks upward and they subjugate their heart to their Father in heaven, they are healed. But if they don't do that, they are erased. So this, and then right after this homily, it goes back to the halacha. A deaf person, a person who does not have their full faculties, and a child cannot fulfill the obligation on behalf of others, meaning a child can't blow the shofar and fulfill the obligation for other people. So we have this agadah here, sandwiched in between the halacha. Why is this here? It's nice, it's, to give a nice break in the law. Let's take a little pause and have a nice homily break. So if we pay attention carefully to the language here, we'll see this isn't just happens to be here. There's a very significant connection between these homilies and the halacha. What's that connection? It says, et libam. They subjugate their heart. And we find a similar word was found in our halacha. Im kivein libo yatsa v'im lav lo yatsa. Do you direct your heart? Now, this might seem, not significant, but actually a parallels of these two homilies that are found, with the war of Amalek and the Nachash HaNechoshet, which are found in the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael and the Chilta de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, two works of Midrash Halacha. Those are from the time of the Mishnah. It's the same rabbis who wrote the Mishnah. They don't have this term Mishabdim et Libam. It just says, they they do the will of God, but they don't have the reference to heart. So it seems like there is a purposeful reworking of this agadah to make it fit this context. So what is that? Why is it here? So it seems, we have this halacha. If you hear a shofar, you only fulfill the mitzvah if you direct your heart. That is followed by this agadah, which tells you that as long as Israel subjugated their hearts to God, then they were victorious and they won. Why did the editor of the Mishnah, why did Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi put this here? And there are two ways to understand this. Perhaps the point of the agadah is to define the halacha. What does it mean to be mechavein, one's slave to God? It means to mishabed, mishabdim at libam. How do you direct your heart to God? It's to subjugate your heart to God. And it's very, and there's a thematic connection as well. What are we doing when we hear the shofar blown on Rosh Hashanah? We want to, we're pleading for our life, pleading for forgiveness. And what does this midrash say? As long as you subjugate your heart, then you'll get salvation. The Israelites will be healed. We will win wars. We'll be victorious. And perhaps that's what the juxtaposition of this halacha here about, having to direct your heart with this midrash about subjugating your heart is meant to do. So that's one possibility, one possible way to understand this juxtaposition, that this agadah defines the halacha. There is another possibility of what the connection would be and why this is placed here. And it could be, well, there's two different ways to observe the halacha. You can have what we call, letter of the law. Letter of the law is, you have to direct your heart. And what does direct your heart mean? It might just mean to do the mitzvah. If I'm walking past a shul and I hear the shofar, it's not enough to just hear it. I also have to want to do the mitzvah. And as long as I do that, yatsa. And that's the letter of the law, and that's good enough. But then what does the Midrash tell us? There is a lifnim mishirat hadin. There's something more you can aspire to. And what's that? You can subjugate your whole heart and your whole being to God. Not just, it's not enough just I just want to do the mitzvah. I also want to feel this. I want to subjugate myself to God and, change my ways and do whatever I can to be a better person. And so do you have to do that? No, and that's not something what most people can aspire to do, but it is something that we can aspire to do. So you may call this the diavad or letter of the law and lifnim shurat hadin. And that does also fit with what many define as the role of the narrative and agadah in law. There's the letter of the law, and then there's the way people can practice it, and other values that can be reflected in the stories that we tell. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. Now, either way, It's very clear from the Mishnaic law and the Agadah here that in order to do at least these 3 mitzvot, you have to have a Kavana. It's not enough to just do the act. And that's exactly what this Mishnah says. 2 people can do the same exact act, Zeh Shama v'Zeh Shama, but if one does not, Zeh kivein libo v'Zeh lo kivein libo, then the one who didn't direct their heart is not going to fulfill the mitzvah. An act alone is not enough. You also need something in eternal to go with it. And by the way, why heart? In the ancient world, the heart is the seat of the intellect. So you find that referenced in the Torah as well. So when they speak about thoughts, it's always located in the heart. So that is the Mishnah. It seems pretty straightforward. Yet, and I'll bring it here in the Yerushalmi. We really have the same thing. It goes in the same direction. And it makes a diuk that, the fact that it says the person is passing shows that only if you're a passing, do you have to have a specific kavana. But if you are standing there, says the Yerushalmi, we can assume that you have the proper kavana. Because the fact that you are standing there next to a shul, listening to the shofar being blown, that indicates that you want to do the mitzvah as well. Okay, so the Yerushalmi goes in the same direction as the Mishnah. When we go to the Bavli, we see something very different take place. Let me split the screen here so I can have both the Hebrew and the English for those who want to have that on. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm not sure. I have it somewhere else. Okay, I'll get that in. I'm moving for you. I'm having computer issues. Okay, so I'll read and translate, and then I'll give you the English. Or you know what? Oh, I'll show you the Hebrew, and then I'll share English with you separately. Okay, so this is the Bavli on our Mishnah. We saw about having to have Kavana when blowing the shofar. Shachule le'avua de Shmuel. They sent to the father of Shmuel. Shmuel is the very prominent first generation Babylonian Amora. So this is his father from really early Amoraim, almost pre-Amoraim. So they sent the following to Shmuel's father: Kafu va'achal matzah yatsa. If someone of horses, a Jew, to eat matzah, clearly on a Pesach, yatsa, you fulfill your mitzvah to eat matzah. Now the Gemara, I left this out, asks, well, who's the one of forcing you? If you'll say it's a demon who forced you, and it's really interesting, the reference to demons we find only in the Babylonian Talmud, not the Yerushalmi. Many people have written about this. So if you say it's a demon, that can't be, because that's like one who doesn't have their wits, and one who doesn't have their wits that does not have to do any mitzvah. Rather, who's one of forcing you? Says the Gemara, a Persian. Okay, so a non-Jew forces a Jew to eat matzah on a Pesach. So what's the implication? The Jew didn't want to eat it. The Jew didn't want to do the mitzvah of eating matzah on a Pesach, but they ate it nonetheless. And what's the law? Yatzah. They fulfill their obligation to eat matzah on a Pesach. Okay, so that's the ruling said by Shmuel. Rava then, fourth generation Amora says, makes the following inference. Amar Rava, Zot omeret. What does this mean? The implication of this is Hatokea lashir yatsa. That if you blow the shofar to make music, or Rashi has a girsa, you blow it to lashade, ward off a demonic attack, it seems, you fulfill your obligation. Meaning, so you're blowing the shofar not to fulfill your mitzvah of Tekiyat HaShofar Rosh Hashanah. Rather, you're blowing the shofar for some other reason. You want to play a nice song on your shofar, or you want to do some demonic incantation. But whatever the reason is not to do the mitzvah, but based on the father of Shmuel's rule, Rava says, you fulfill your obligation on Rosh Hashanah. So ask the Gemara, Pishhita, isn't this obvious? Obviously, if you're forced to eat matzah to fulfill your mitzvah on Pesach, then it's also obvious that if you blow the shofar Rosh Hashanah, even for some other reason, you also fulfill your mitzvah. So the Gemara gives the Mahu to Atema. It's now going to tell you why this isn't obvious. And in doing so, it's also going to tell us the difference between these two mitzvot. So what's the difference between them, and why was it not obvious? There, in the case of Pesach, what's the mitzvah? Achol matzah amar rachmana. The Torah tells you to eat matzah. The mitzvah is to eat matzah. The Torah doesn't care how you ate it or why you ate it. The mitzvah is to eat it. The ha'achal did that. So even if someone forced you to eat it, the effect is the same. And you can even say, your body got the same nutrients from eating matzah, whether you were forced to eat it or you willingly ate it. You did the action that the Torah requires, and that's to eat. When it comes to shofar, it's not just about hearing the shofar. Why? Because what does the Torah say? It says, Zechron Tu'aketiv. The Torah says it's a remembrance of a blowing. So that indicates that it's not enough to have an action, but there has to be some sort of memory action going on with it as well. So maybe you would have thought that it's not enough to just blow the shofar, but you also have to blow it for the reason of to get the shofar in Rosh Hashanah. So kamashmala. So that's why Rava had to teach this. Okay, so you maybe would have thought it's obvious that you could blow the shofar for another reason. Rava says it's not obvious. Now, what are you all thinking? What do you mean it's obvious that you can blow the shofar for another reason? We had an explicit Mishnah which says that you only fulfill your obligation on Rosh Hashanah if you have Kavana, if one kivein libo, to hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And the Gemara is going to get to that. But first, it just wants to make a general principle. So Rava just said, Hatzokeh l'shir yatsa. But the Gemara, the redactors of the Gemara, now generate a principle which underlies Rava's rule. And what is that? Alma kesava Rava. Consequently, Rava holds mitzvot ein tzrichot kavana. That the performance of mitzvot, and again, it really seems to mean a ritual mitzvot, does not require intention. So here we have the formulation of this rule. And it's inferred from Rava's rule. Now, it's not an off inference because now Rava's rule is going to be challenged based on other areas of halacha. So even though he only actually formulated it in regard to the mitzvah of shofar, the challenges are based on other areas of halacha. So what are the challenges? Everything we already saw. Mitzvot ein tzrichot kavana. What about the Mishnah in Brachot? Hayakorei b'Torah v'egias man mikra in kivein libo yatsa v'mav lo yatsa. We read this before in Masechet Brachot. If you're reading the Torah, you're reading the pasuk of Shema, and it's the time of the and then it's the time of the recitation of Shema. You only fulfill your mitzvah if you had kavana. It says you need kavana. So what do you mean mitzvot ein tzrichot kavana? So what does the Gemara say? No. You actually misunderstood the Mishnah before. My love kivein libo say, isn't this you have Kavana to fulfill the mitzvah? Says the Gemara, no. Lo, you got it wrong. What's the Kavana that the Mishnah requires? Likrot. It's just a basic Kavana to do the act to read the pasuk Shema Yisrael. And then says the Gemara, what do you mean likrot? Hakakari. That's exactly what the person was doing. It says in the Mishnah, Hayakorei b'Torah. You're reading the Torah. Obviously, you have kavana to read the Torah, so you don't need a special kavana to read. So, what do you mean that's all you need? What do you mean that im kivein libo means kavana to read? It says no. What is a person doing? Bakorei lehageh. Meaning here, when it said Hayakorei b'Torah, a person's reading the Torah. What did it really mean? One's reading the portion of the Torah for the purpose of proofreading. That's really what the Gemara is saying this means. You thought it meant, I was reading the Torah to read the Torah. But no, what did it mean? I was reading the Torah to proofread. Then Higiyazman Mikra, the time of its reading came up. So what do I have to do? I have to put my mind to it. Why do I put my mind to it? To read. That is how the Bavli interprets this Mishnah to conform with Rava, and it now does that with the other cases as well. It then brings up our Mishnah, the very Mishnah of this sugya. A person's passing by a shul, or the house is near a shul. And again, you're standing by a shul, you hear the shofar. You only fulfill the mitzvah if you intend your heart. My love in kivein libo, let's say, doesn't this mean you had kavana to fulfill the mitzvah? No, but once again, no, you got it wrong. It meant lishmoa. You just had to have kavana to hear it. Lishmoa, hashama. It says the person who heard it. That's exactly what it said. You are shama kol shofar. So you did hear it. So what do you mean you need kavana to hear it? So what does the Gemara say? Savor chamor ba'almahu. This shama kol shofar, you didn't think it was a shofar. What did this person in the Mishnah think it was? They thought it was the braying of a donkey. A donkey. I don't know. So what must you have a Kavana for? You have to know it's a shofar. You don't have to do anything more than that. You don't have to want to do a mitzvah. You don't have to want to think, I must be better this year. All you have to do is be aware of the fact that you hear a shofar. If you hear the sound of the shofar and you think if it's a donkey, that wouldn't work. So once again, we'll put it in here. How does it understood? Daniel, you heard the sound of the shofar in Rosh Hashanah and thought it was a donkey. Okay, and so how do you fulfill the mitzvah? Says the Mishnah, according to the Bavli, you have to pay attention to know it's a shofar being blown. That's all you need to do. So meaning, how does the Gemara read all these Mishnayot? What is the Kavana that the Mishnah requires? It's a very minimal one. You just have to be aware of the fact that you're doing an action which constitutes a mitzvah. As long as you're aware of the fact that you're doing the act which constitutes the mitzvah, that is adequate. Okay. And the Gemara goes on challenging Rava. Now his older contemporary Abaye challenges him, and I want to read it just because the implications are important. But yeah, so the question is a bit complicated. So what is that? So Abaye asks, and then it asks one more question. This time from Paraita, that you have to, both the one who blows the shofar and the one who hears the shofar has to have kavana. So says the Gemara, obviously the one who blows the shofar knows that they're blowing a shofar. So what else could kavana mean other than kavana to do the mitzvah? So again, it says no, that person was just trying to make little barking sounds, but not sound the shofar as is required on Rosh Hashanah. So again, the kavana required is a very minimal one. You just have to be aware of the fact that you're doing a mitzvah, which, you are doing an action which happens to be a mitzvah as well. And it's at the time that the mitzvah has to be done. But more than that, you're not obligated. The final challenge to Rava, these three were all anonymous. This fourth one is now brought by Abaye, where he says, well, according to you, Rava, Elamei ata hayeshem bishmini basukah yilakeh. Someone who sleeps in the sukkah on the 8th day, meaning Ashmini Atzeret, meaning when there's no longer an obligation to dwell in the sukkah, should get malkut, should get lashes. Why? because, okay, this involves a few steps here. You no longer have an obligation to dwell in the sukkah once it's Shmini Atzeret on the 8th day. Okay, so if you do dwell in the sukkah on the 8th day, says Abaye, you are violating Bala Tosif. You're adding to a mitzvah. Why? Even though it's not the time you have to do the mitzvah, the very fact that you do a mitzvah, even if you don't want to do a mitzvah, you do the mitzvah. Meaning, because you are, as long as you dwell in the sukkah, you fulfill the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah. However, there's no longer a mitzvah to dwell in the sukkah. So now you are fulfilling a mitzvah, but since it's not the time for it, you are violating adding to the mitzvah. Okay, so is that clear? A little complicated there? Okay, so if you can fulfill a mitzvah without kavana to do so, so that means, and because by just doing an action which constitutes a mitzvah, that means you fulfill the mitzvah. So that means anytime you go in a sukkah, when it's not the holiday of Sukkot, you fulfill a mitzvah, but since it's not the time of the mitzvah, you are violating adding to mitzvot, Baal Tosif, which is a biblical prohibition. So so 3 answers are offered in the name of Rava, and there's, so either it's 3 possibilities of what he said or 3 different traditions of what he said. So the 3 answers are, number 1, Amar lo she'ani omer mitzvot eno overalem ela bizmanam. You can only violate the prohibition of Baal Tosif of adding to mitzvot when it's the time of the mitzvah's performance. So once Sukkot is over, you can't add to it anymore. It's over. That's answer number 1. But then Rava gives another answer. Answer number 2, Rava Amar latzeit lo bai kavana. To fulfill, when I say mitzvah don't require kavana, it's only to fulfill a mitzvah. To fulfill a positive commandment, you don't have to need kavana to do so. Just doing the action is enough. You'll fulfill your obligation. But la'avor, when it comes to violations, on the other hand, ba'i kavana, that does indeed require kavana. It's not enough to just do an action which is a prohibition. You also have to want to violate. You have to purposely want to do a violation. But to just do an action which constitutes a violation, that does require kavana. And then he adds a third answer, which is to violate Tosif, to violate adding to a command, you both need kavana and it has to be at the proper time. But it's this second answer which really interests me here. And why is that? So first of all, we see Rava introduces this, it's, while it seems like a pretty straightforward halacha, mitzvot ein tzrichot kavana, we see that it's diametrically opposite to Mishnaic law. The Mishnah was very clear about, again, at least these 3 mitzvot. You only fulfill the mitzvah of a kriyat shema, of a tekiyat shofar, of reading the Megillah on Purim with kavana. And Rava says something which is the exact opposite of what the Mishnah says. And we see how the Gemara has to work very hard to make Rava conform with the Mishnayot. And, while it does manage to, these certainly are not what one would have thought these Mishnayot meant at first glance. I don't think when we read this Mishnah, you're reading the Torah, I don't think the, obvious read of it is you're reading the Torah for the purpose of proofreading. And Hevei Libo just means I have to want to do the act. Or, someone's passing by a shul and they hear the shofar. I don't think the obvious read would be, and they heard a sound of a shofar, which they thought to be a donkey. And so what's kivin libo? You have to want to do the mitzvah. I mean, you have to want to do the act. I mean, you have to be aware of it being a shofar as opposed to a donkey. That's not what the obvious meaning of each of these mission ayot are, but we see how the Gemara is able to harmonize these Mishnayot with Rava's approach, though it does seem to go against their plain meaning. And again, when we look at that Midrash that was brought, that certainly bolsters the evidence that this is something more than just being aware of the fact that you're blowing a shofar, but it's acquiring something more meaningful. And indeed, when we go to just the halacha l'maaseh on this, I have this here. Okay, yeah, the Rif. So when the Rif codifies this in his rewritten Gemara, what does he write? So this is the Rif, our sugya we just read. Nitzkavein shomer v'lo nitzkavein mashmiya, o shenitzkavein mashmiya v'lo nitzkavein shomer lo yatsa, ash nitzkavein shomer u'mashmiya. Both the person who sounds the shofar and the person who hears the shofar has to have kavana, and then it goes to the very end of the sugya. Amar le Rabbi Zera le Shamaye. Rabbi Zera said to his servant, "His kavein v'takali. Please, have kavana and sound the shofar for me. Ama kekesar mashminami by kavana." So he thinks the sounder also needs to have kavana, and that's for the end of it. And basically, what do we see from this Rif here? He completely leaves Rava out. The Rif disregards this entire middle section here, and I just brought you right after Rava's back in 4. The end of the sugya is what the Rif just read. Amar it's kavein v'takali, have kavana and blow the shofar for me. So the Rif leaves out this entire section. And maybe because both the fact that Rava goes against Mishnaic law, but also there's something a little, one might say, unsettling maybe about Rava's approach, that you don't need Kavana to do a mitzvah. I mean, that's kind of a strange thing, one may think. I think we tend to think that mitzvot should be done with a certain level of devotion. I think many of us think if we just prayed and weren't paying attention, or we're just dancing in shul and just went through the motions, that is not a very meaningful religious experience. And in fact, one of the critiques of early Christians against Jews was that Jews are so technical. They just care about actions. They just, are very picky about the halakha. They don't care about what's inside of a person. And a sugya like this would certainly add a fuel to that. I mean, you don't need kavana to do a mitzvah. It's enough to just be aware of the action. Don't we think that religious actions require something more than just the surface act? So that's just one question. And again, the other question of how can Rava contradict the Mishnah? I mean, the Mishnah says straight out, "Im kivein libo yatsa v'mlav lo yatsa." And yes, the Gemara went through hoops to try to support Rava, but we see that even that the Rif, it seems, wasn't impressed by that and left that all out. Now the Baal or the Serachia Halevi, always a Pashtan, at least what I've seen, he says, no, the halacha is like Rava. The Ramban in Melchamot Hashem says, no, the halacha isn't like Rava. Mitzvot need kavana. And even Rava didn't think this. He was just, explaining the opinion of the father of Shemuel. So, even in medieval times, this issue is not set, and we see opinions on both sides of the matter. So one, how does Rava contradict the Mishnah? 2, Rava seems to go against religious, I guess I'd say, inclination, or maybe the better word is intuition we would have, that religious acts should have something more to it than just going through the oceans of doing an act. Now, a third question I want to add here is that Rava's disregard for Kavana here in the case of Mitzvot actually goes against his more a general approach when it comes to halacha. For Rava, and I have a whole chapter devoted to this, is he is a kind of exceptional and consistently requiring that one act with kavana, with intention, in order to be held liable. So I brought you just a few examples here in source 11. Okay, so just a few cases here. Sure, it's smart. It was said how let's say someone worships idols due to love and fear. What does love and fear mean? The Rambam says either love and fear of another person, or love and fear, or of the form of idolatry. Either way, you're not doing it because because you think that this idol is going to give you blessings. You love this person, or you just think it's a nice looking idol. So that's your reason for doing it. Abaye Amar Chayev. Abaye says, I don't care why you did it. You're liable. You worshipped idolatry. Rava, our same Rava we just met before, Amar Pater. Rava says you're exempt from idolatry. So what's the source of their machloket? Abaye says you're liable because I don't care why you did it. You served this idol. You worshipped it. Rava Amar Pater. Why does Rava say this person's exempt? If you accepted this idol as a god, then yeah, you'd be liable. But if you didn't accept it as a god, then no, you're not liable. It's not enough to just do the act of idol worship. You also have to want to accept this idol as a god, meaning your kavana matters. Your action is not enough. For Abaye, your action is enough. Okay. One more example. There's also in Tractate Sanhedrin. So this is a very famous sugya on when a Jew is obligated to martyr themselves or violate a prohibition. So the law is generally, summarizing it, that there's a big three averot: idolatry, sexual indiscretions, and murder. A Jew must let themselves be killed rather than violate. All other violations a Jew can violate and not let themselves be killed. However, says one tradition according to Rabbi Yochanan, if the violation occurs in a public, then a Jew is not allowed to violate and must let themselves be killed. So ask the Gemara here, Ha-Esther before Hesed. Wait a minute. A Jew has to choose a martyrdom over a violation if the violation occurs in a public. What about Hester, the biblical character Esther? Now, what exactly is her sin? Let's just keep it simple. She married a non-Jew. Now, it says in the Gemara here, no matter what the avera is, no matter what the violation is, if it's occurring in a public sphere, the Jew must let themselves be killed and not violate. So how did Hester violate, to do this violation in a public and not choose the path of martyrdom? Now you can say because she had to save the Jewish people. Well, she didn't know she was going to save the Jewish people. When she married Achashverosh, she should have let herself be killed rather than violate. So how could she have violated? Now, of course, this question assumes that biblical characters conform to halacha. Okay, so that's just an assumption of Midrash. So anyways, again, Abaye and Rava appear here giving answers to this question. So what does Abaye say? Esther karka olam hayata. Esther was like the ground of the earth. We can give a whole lecture just on this one line. But what does he mean? Simply, she was passive. As long as the Jew does not actively do the violation, but passively lets the violation happen to them, they're not obligated to choose martyrdom. So that's Abaye. Again, Abaye focuses on the action. Did the person worship idolatry? Yes, they're chayiv. Did the Jew actively commit an avera, or did they passively let it happen? But he's focused on the action. What does Rava say? Rava Amar Hanaat Atzman Shani. When it's for their own pleasure, the law is different, meaning it matters why the non-Jew wants the Jew to commit a violation. If it's to violate the Torah, then yeah, the Jew has to choose a martyrdom. But if the non-Jew does not care about the Torah, he didn't care that she's Jewish, he just wants his own pleasure. And it has, Rav also brings another case here. If a non-Jew tells a Jew, cut grass on Shabbat, if it's to feed to an animal, the Jew's allowed to cut the grass. Why? Because the non-Jew doesn't care about having the Jew violate Shabbat. The non-Jew just wants the Jew to feed grass to their animal. Then the Jew's allowed to violate. But if the non-Jew says to the Jew, cut this grass and throw it in the river, it's clear that the purpose of the non-Jew was to cause a Jew to violate the Torah. And that is when a Jew has to choose martyrdom, when it occurs in a public. So again, for Rava, the purpose, Kavana, matters. So here we see, and there's more cases like this. I don't know, I didn't. So Rava, for example, is the one who coins the term in Hilchot Shabbat, davar she'ein mitkaven, that one is not liable for violating Shabbat if they don't intend to violate Shabbat. It's attributed to Rabbi Shimon the Tana in the Mishnah, but it's actually a Rava who coins that term, davar she'eino mitkaven. And we see in ruling after rule in a very large range of areas, laws of karbanot, laws of nizikin. Rava consistently only holds one liable if they have kavana, if they purposely want to commit a violation. And we saw that in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah itself, Rava makes this distinction. Remember, we saw him say, are we? The Gemara here. Latzeit lo bai kavana. La'avor bai kavana. To fulfill a mitzvah, you don't need kavana. You don't need intent. It's enough to just know you're doing the action. To violate, that does require kavana. So how can we understand Rava's rule here? Again, Rava's rule, Miṣvot ein tzrichot kavana, goes against the Mishnah. It goes against the clear Mishnaic rules. Two, we saw that it goes against even a religious intuition we would have. Shouldn't mitzvot have to be done with a kavanah? Shouldn't we intend and have devotion when we do mitzvot? And three, we see that Rava is not consistent here, because when it comes to averot, when it comes to violations, he places supreme importance on kavana. Why then does he make the split with regard to mitzvot? So there are a few answers one can have. The one that I prefer is one that sees something unique in mitzvot. And first, we'll start with averot. For Rava, it seems he really to make someone liable in an avera, to make someone guilty of having committed a wrong. Rava requires that the person want to do something wrong. And this actually is a very interesting parallel in Aristotelian philosophy. For Aristotle, It's not an act which makes someone a guilty, bad person. What's the thing that makes a person a bad person? It's wanting to do something bad. It's having in our terms, the kavana to commit a wrong, to hurt another person. When it comes to guilt, it's the kavana, it's the will of the person that defines them as a guilty person, as having done something wrong, and which makes them responsible for their actions. So when it comes to mitzvot, you can just say, well, since it's not about the moral guilt of the person, okay, it's enough to just do the act. And while we don't assume most people want to do something wrong unless they specifically want to do something wrong, say that we can just assume most people want to do the right thing. That's on one level. But I think we can take this to another level as well. And I think this is actually a very powerful Gemara, and telling us something about what does it mean to do a ritual. As I said, the early a Christian critique of Judaism was that it's very technical. It's just about actions. It's picky. So there's nothing in aside, and that kind of thinking persisted for a very long time. But there's a new area in kind of anthropological research, which is rituals studies. And this new area has seen that when it comes to ritual, there's actually something very meaningful about the ritual act itself, irrespective of what a person thinking about it has at the time. And what do I mean? That the very act, the very fact that a person does an act which constitutes a ritual that a group gives meaning to, that their group ascribes a greater importance to, that is meaningful. So, when I light candles on Friday, I can light candles right now, and that doesn't mean anything. But when I light candles on a Friday, as the sun is going down, no matter why I am lighting it at that moment, the fact that I'm lighting candles because the group I belong to says that's meaningful, that is meaningful. The fact that someone goes to prayers every morning, goes to tefillah, even if, during their tefillah, their head might be elsewhere and they might be thinking of a lot of other things. But the fact that they devote this time to go pray with the text that, our group has given, doing it in the way that, has been prescribed, that is meaningful to the group, those actions are meaningful. And I think what one can read in this rule mitzvot in Tzrichot Kavana is the very special place that ritual acts have, that their actions just in and of themselves are supremely meaningful, irrespective of what the particular a person has at the time that they're doing it. So in Rava making this bifurcation in different areas of law, he may be introducing ritual as this special area of halacha that's unlike other areas of halacha. So when it comes to ritual, it's the action that's meaningful, irrespective of the person's kavana. So as long as someone is aware that they are doing this act, which constitutes the ritual, which constitutes the mitzvah, and they are doing it at the right time that it's meant to be done, and they know that they are doing it, that in itself is meaningful and fulfills a mitzvah according to Rava. Now, again, that's not something that everyone agrees with, and we saw that's a subject to debate among the medieval Rishonim, and it continue to be debated amongst the Acharonim as well. But I personally find that to be a very powerful message that Rava gives us with regard to mitzvot and our performance of them. And I think it really elevates the act of mitzvot, even if, not everyone's able to have that level of subjugating their hearts every time they do a mitzvah. Mitzvot ein tzricha kavana tells us that that's okay, that the mitzvah still has meaning and still meaningful and still fulfills one's obligation on a religious level. So, maybe my PowerPoint will work now. I have some of it. Okay, at least I can sum up. I had a whole few things here, but at least I can just tell you. Okay, another time. Thank you all so much. And I don't know if there's time for questions or if this hour is strict, but thank you.
Thank you so much for that incredibly insightful shiur. If anyone has any questions, comments, feel free to raise your hand, write in the chat box, or unmute. Now is the time. I will say that just on the point of rituals having value, they do have value, but clearly not like we have the prophet rebuking us by saying, I never asked you to come up with these sacrifices. They clearly had Kavana when they were bringing up the sacrifices, and clearly they were doing a very valuable ritual. But the Navi completely rejects it and says, hey, this is a rejection of the entire service of God. So from a religious level, we do see that even though rituals have value, they keep the community together and all of the things you're mentioning, but it is rejected.
Right, but
it's not
what the prophets, first of all, I think it's really excellent question. What the prophets mean is that if you're a bad person, then your rituals are meaningless. Meaning, don't do the rituals if you're going to be a bad person, and all this stuff that the prophets were telling them to do. So that doesn't mean that rituals wipe away the bad things. I just mean, all things being equal, a ritual act in its own right, I think, is very meaningful. I think this can even be, used on a policy level. Just knowing, Jewish day schools, the problem with a prayer and kids not paying attention. But I think when we shift the focus and just have that mindfulness that kids be aware that we go to a school, that we're in a community where we take time every day to pray because we believe in God. I think it's a very powerful message. And I think that is, something that could underline this sugya and this principle of what does it mean, mitzvot ein tzrichot kavana, that a ritual is meaningful, that it does have meaning. Now, again, that doesn't mean that wipes away bad things. We'd call that, religious hypocrisy. And all things being equal, if you're a good person, then rituals are meaningful, even if, you're not able to subjugate your heart like the Agada says every time you pray, and you might think, oh my gosh, it's meaningless because I'm not having the right to Kavana every time I do mitzvot. So this is coming to say, no, it's not meaningless. There is a very deep meaning to a ritual act, even if, in your specific moment, you're not, your mindset isn't there.
Right. And Neil, you had a question?
Yes, I was interested in how Kavana develops, say from an 18-year-old to a 28-year-old to a 38-year-old, through our lifespan. It's not really the same, is it? And how that relates to ritual, because you're going to learn things ritually, and then Kavana will come into it. And it seems to me to be a complicated relationship between Kavana and ritual. It's not; they're connected in some sort of way. Children are going to learn ritual, and then Kavana will come in, and as a sort of 70-year-old, I'll think of things differently than I did when I was 30. The sort of Kavana. Wondering any sort of thoughts on that, or any wisdom?
No, I think that's also really an excellent point. Well, I think that's part of what the juxtaposition, just showing this again, between that, a black and white halacha, im kiven libo yatzavim lav lo yatzav, with this midrash of a Moshe raising his arms and saying, yeah, you fulfill your mitzvah. This is fine. That doesn't mean there aren't more things you can aspire for. You can aspire for it. You can aspire for more and have something more meaningful and eternal and at different points in a person's life. Whatever that is, it will be different. The different needs we have, the different places we're in. But I still think, what I think is nice about this, that it still leaves a space for even the act alone has a great value to it. But this tells us we can still aspire for more, but we can also be okay with just the act and find the meaning in the act. And I mean, as you were just saying, that there is a lot of meaning, like something very moving about the fact that knowing a lot of people are lighting candles, or you can go into a shul, a place in the world, and there's differences, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, but it's basically very similar. And there's something about just that act of, there's a lot of different meanings, and I don't even, we each have our own meanings and what that means for us. But the action itself is also meaningful.
Well, thanks.
And we can, and that still leaves space to aspire for more. But
thanks.
Thank you though.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So I think.
Yeah, if you would ask Rava, he would also tell you to aspire for more. That's what I got out of this. Is that correct?
I wonder, like, what do you say? I mean, that's what the Ramban says. That's how Nachmanides explains it. He says this isn't actually even Rava's opinion. He's just explaining the father of Shmuel's opinion. So the Ramban would agree with that. And hence he holds Miṣvot Tzrichot Kavana, as do really many of the Rishonim and Acharonim. I don't know if Rava would say we should aspire for more. Now, I mean, maybe there's other ways to read it. This could be Rava's making it easier. Maybe, Rava wants more people to keep mitzvot, so if you don't require Kavana, that just makes it, he spreads the umbrella wider over who fulfills a mitzvah. And there are other halachot where Rava seems to be motivated by judicial efficiency, helping people, just making things more practical. So maybe this is just a practical thing. More, it's like how in Israel, the rabbinate, keeps more like lenient standards for kashrut, so that more people keep kosher than making it stricter, so that less people will that could be what's motivating Rava as well. I think there's definitely a lot of different ways to read it.
I mean, also just
again,
on
that doesn't mean one can't aspire. Sorry.
And also just on that, there's sort of like I believe Rava is talking they're having a legal conversation. That's the thing that, the Christians push back on, but they completely don't have a legal system at all. So they just completely gave that up. So he's talking from the perspective of, if we're going to be whipping someone, we have to have a very clear definition for it. The moment you open the door and say, well, it's up to spiritual connection, how do you define that? And are we going to start whipping people for not having proper spiritual connection? So
and I think you're right. And I think we especially see that in the modern world, where people, if religious practice is based only on of healing, then that doesn't hold things very well. And, it's recalls the famous debate about the nature of prayer between the Rambam, Maimonides, and Ramban, Nachmanides. And the Rambam says, we have a set prayer we have to say every single day, and you have to do it, whereas versus the Ramban, no, when you feel it, you pray. But I think, just based on what we see in the modern world, I think we know that if people would just pray when they felt it, then they wouldn't pray. And there's something, yes, it's legalistic, but it works. I mean, it keeps more people practice it when it's when there's kind of these things you have to do, regularity. This is a nice way of saying this, consistency versus, I don't know, I can't, Kavana versus kavua, right? That's what it is. Kavana versus kavua. And there's something about doing the act and being committed to the act, even if you're not feeling it at the moment. But the fact that you have a commitment to it, first of all, I think that's meaningful. That shows what the values are, and that's part of what Miṣvot in the Strichot Kavana ritual theory would say. But you also do it, and it leads to a practice. So, again, while I know the natural inclination is, well, we have to feel it, but I think there's something just when we, stop and think about it, this really is the model that we end up doing a lot, and just kind of being mindful of it and appreciating the value of practice and giving just a value to that, which is why I like this sugya a lot.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much, Doctor, for that extremely insightful shiur. Hopefully, we'll have you many more times with us in the future. And Leila Tov, everyone. Good afternoon.
Yep. Thank you very much. Thanks.
I'm wishing you all a Chag Shavuot Sameach. Good morning or good night. In Israel, it's
you
pretty
very much.
late, so
Yeah.
thank you all
you.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Such a